The mahogany conference table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of Morrison and Associates law firm, its polished surface reflecting the tension that filled the room like thick smoke. I sat in the uncomfortable leather chair, my hands trembling slightly as I stared at the manila folder before me, the folder that contained my father's last will and testament. Across from me, Victoria Sterling Hartwell sat with the poise of a queen surveying her kingdom. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against her Hermes purse, and her ruby-red lips curved into what could charitably be called a smile, though it reminded me more of a predator baring its teeth. According to YouTube analytics, 99.6% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. At 45, she was only 10 years older than me, but she wore her victory like a crown. "Thank you all for coming," said Mr. Morrison, a portly man in his 60s, whose wire-rimmed glasses caught the light as he opened the folder. "We're here for the reading of Theodore Hartwell's last will and testament." My father. Theodore Hartwell. Even now, 3 weeks after his sudden heart attack, I could barely believe he was gone. The man who had built Hartwell Industries from nothing, who had conquered markets across 3 continents, who had seemed invincible, reduced to legal documents and property distributions. Before we begin, Victoria's voice cut through my thoughts like broken glass. I think it's only fair to warn dear Marcus here that he shouldn't get his hopes up. Her cold blue eyes fixed on me with undisguised malice. Theodore was very clear about his wishes regarding his ungrateful son. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain still. Ungrateful. The accusation burned because it was so far from the truth. I had dedicated my entire adult life to Hartwell Industries, working 16-hour days, sacrificing relationships, pouring my soul into the company my father had built. But Victoria had poisoned him against me in those final years, whispering lies and half-truths until he could barely look at me without suspicion clouding his eyes. "Victoria," Mr. Morrison said diplomatically, "perhaps we should let the document speak for itself." But she wasn't finished. "I mean, really, Marcus, what did you expect? After that stunt you pulled with the Jakarta contract? Theodore never forgave you for going behind his back." My jaw clenched. The Jakarta contract, my attempt to prevent the company from entering what I knew was a corrupt deal that would have destroyed our reputation in Southeast Asia. I had been right, as events later proved, but by then the damage between my father and me was done. Victoria had made sure of that. "The Jakarta contract saved the company millions," I said quietly, my voice barely controlled. "Is that what you tell yourself?" Victoria laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of ice. Theodore saw it as the ultimate betrayal, his own son, undermining him in front of the board. I remembered that board meeting like it was yesterday. The shocked faces of the directors as I presented evidence of corruption in the Indonesian government minister's office. My father's face, red with rage and humiliation. Victoria's hand on his arm, whispering comfort, positioning herself as the supportive wife while I became the ungrateful son who had embarrassed his father in front of his peers. "Shall we proceed?" Mr. Morrison cleared his throat, sensing the tension threatening to explode. "The will is quite extensive, given Mr. Hartwell's substantial assets. The estate is valued at approximately $36 million, including real estate, investments, and business holdings. $36 million. It wasn't just about the money. It was about validation, about recognition, about my father's final judgment of me. But as I looked at Victoria's smug expression, I already knew what was coming. Mr. Morrison adjusted his glasses and began to read. "I, Theodore Hartwell, being of sound mind and body, Do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The legal language washed over me as he detailed the various smaller bequests: money to his longtime secretary, Mrs. Chen, donations to several charities, his collection of vintage cars to his old friend Robert Manning. Each bequest felt like another nail in my coffin, confirming what Victoria had already told me. Then came the main event. To my beloved wife, Victoria Sterling Hartwell, Mr. Morrison continued, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including all real property, financial assets, and my controlling stake in Hartwell Industries, with full confidence that she will use these resources wisely and in accordance with my wishes. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Everything. She got everything. $36 million, the company I had bled for, the house I had grown up in, all of it, gone to a woman who had manipulated and schemed her way into my father's life barely 5 years ago. Victoria's smile widened, and I saw her exchange a meaningful glance with someone behind me. Turning, I noticed for the first time that her brother Derek was present, lounging against the wall with the casual confidence of a man who knew he was about to become very rich through association. However, Mr. Morrison continued, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. There is one additional provision. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. Additional provision? Yes. Mr. Morrison's voice carried a note of solemnity that hadn't been there before. Mr. Hartwell insisted on including this final clause, which reads as follows: To my son Marcus, who I now realize was only trying to protect the company and family legacy I worked so hard to build, I leave the one thing that matters more than all the money in the world, the truth. Victoria, if you are hearing this, know that I discovered your affair with your personal trainer, your systematic embezzlement from the company's charity foundation, and your plan to sell Hartwell Industries to our competitors the moment I was gone. The security footage and financial records are in the safe deposit box at First National, Box 47,291. Marcus, the combination is your mother's birthday. Use this information wisely. You were right about the Jakarta contract, and you were right about everything else. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. P.S. Check the red notebook in my study. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears as the implications of my father's words sank in. He knew. Somehow he had figured it out. Victoria's face had gone ashen, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking like a mask painted on a corpse. That's impossible, she whispered, but Mr. Morrison wasn't finished. There's more. In light of the evidence I have compiled regarding Victoria's criminal activities and breach of fiduciary duty, this shall be considered null and void if any evidence of malfeasance on her part comes to light. In such an event, the entirety of my estate shall pass to my son Marcus, along with full authority to pursue all legal remedies against any parties who have defrauded the estate or the company. I felt like I was floating, like the world had suddenly shifted on its axis. My father hadn't abandoned me. In his final months, he had been investigating, compiling evidence, planning this moment. The red notebook. I remembered seeing him writing in it, always tucking it away when I entered his study. This is ridiculous. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair clattering backward. Theodore was clearly suffering from dementia. This entire addendum is invalid. Actually, Mr. Morrison said calmly, Mr. Hartwell was quite specific about this possibility. He underwent a full psychiatric evaluation just 2 weeks before his death, specifically to establish his mental competence. The results are part of the legal record. Derek stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. You can't seriously be considering this garbage. Victoria is his widow. She has rights. Rights that become null and void if she's convicted of embezzlement and fraud, I said, my voice steady for the first time since entering the room. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity I hadn't felt in years. Victoria spun toward me, her composure finally cracking. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? I've spent 5 years building relationships, making connections. The board will never accept you back. The board follows the money, I replied. And if I control the company, I control their future. Her eyes narrowed to slits. Fight this, and I'll make sure everyone knows about your drinking problem, about the rehab stint you think you kept so secret. Go ahead. I stood, meeting her gaze without flinching. I got sober 4 years ago and haven't touched a drop since. Meanwhile, you've been stealing from children's cancer research. Which one of us do you think the public will sympathize with? The next few hours passed in a blur of legal procedures and arrangements. Mr. Morrison explained that we would need to retrieve the evidence from the safe deposit box and that the authorities would likely want to examine the financial records Victoria had allegedly tampered with. As we left the law office, Victoria grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my jacket. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I know things about you, about your father's business dealings. Things that could destroy the company." "Then you'd be destroying your own inheritance," I pointed out. "Unless, of course, you never intended to keep the company intact in the first place." Her face told me everything I needed to know. She had been planning to sell, just as my father had suspected. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank with Mr. Morrison and a police detective. My hands shook as I entered the combination, my mother's birthday, the woman my father had loved deeply before cancer took her when I was 12. The safe deposit box opened with a soft click. Inside, I found a treasure trove of evidence. Financial documents showing systematic transfers from the charity foundation to accounts under Victoria's control. Security footage from my father's home office showing her photographing confidential documents. Email printouts detailing her communications with representatives from Meridian Corporation, our biggest competitor. But the most damning evidence was an audio recording on a small digital device. My father's voice, weak but determined. "Victoria doesn't know I've been recording our conversations." Here's what she said about her plans for the company. The recording was devastating. Victoria's voice, clear and unguarded, discussing her affair, her contempt for my father, and her detailed plan to liquidate Hartwell Industries' assets and sell the company piecemeal to maximize her profit. She even laughed about how easy it had been to manipulate the old fool. Within a week, Victoria was arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and corporate espionage. The media coverage was relentless. "Black Widow Stepmom cons dying millionaire," screamed the headlines. The charity she had robbed, a foundation supporting pediatric cancer research that my mother had established before her death, became a rallying point for public outrage. Derek tried to distance himself from his sister, but investigators found evidence that he had been helping her move money through offshore accounts. He was charged as an accessory. As for me, I found myself suddenly in control of a $36 million empire and a company in desperate need of leadership. The board meeting where I officially took over as CEO was surreal. Many of the same people who had witnessed my supposed humiliation 3 years earlier now stood to applaud as I outlined my vision for Hartwell Industries' future. The Jakarta contract taught me something important, I told the assembled directors. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, even when the people you love don't understand. My father taught me that lesson, though it took him some time to admit it. I threw myself into rebuilding the company with the same obsessive dedication I had shown before, but now with a clear mandate and no one undermining me at every turn. Within 6 months, we had not only stabilized our operations, but expanded into new markets Victoria's planned sale would have made impossible. The red notebook my father had mentioned turned out to contain something far more valuable than evidence. It was full of his thoughts during those final months, his growing realization that he had been manipulated, and his plan to make things right. The last entry, dated just 3 days before his death, brought tears to my eyes. Marcus was right about everything. The Jakarta contract, Victoria, the company's direction. I was so afraid of losing control, of admitting I might be wrong, that I pushed away the one person who truly had the company's best interests at heart. I pray it's not too late to fix this. If something happens to me before I can make amends in person, I hope this will be enough. My son deserves better than the father I've been these past few years. The trial was a media sensation. Victoria, who had once commanded rooms with her beauty and charm, looked haggard and desperate as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the evidence of her crimes. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been driven to desperation by my father's controlling nature, that she deserved the money as compensation for putting up with an older man's demands. The jury wasn't buying it. When the pediatric oncologist testified about how Victoria's theft had delayed critical research that could have saved children's lives, several jurors were openly crying. The security footage of her rifling through confidential files while my father lay sleeping upstairs, recovering from his first minor heart episode, sealed her fate. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Derek got 5 years and was ordered to pay restitution. The day after the sentencing, I sat in my father's study, my study now, reading through some of his old journals. The room still smelled like his cologne and the leather-bound books he had collected over the years. On the desk was a framed photo of him with my mother, both of them young and impossibly happy. Mrs. Chen, my father's longtime secretary who had stayed on to help with the transition, knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Hartwell? There's someone here to see you." I looked up to find a young woman in her 20s, standing in the doorway, clearly nervous. She had dark hair and kind eyes that reminded me of someone, though I couldn't place who. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she said quietly. "I'm a researcher at Children's Hospital. I wanted to thank you personally for what you've done." It took me a moment to understand. "The charity foundation?" She nodded. "The money Victoria stole. It was earmarked for a research project I've been working on for 3 years. A new treatment protocol for aggressive childhood leukemias. We were about to shut down the project when your lawyers called and said the funding would be restored. And we just got approval for human trials. The first patient is a 7-year-old girl named Emma. She has the same type of cancer your mother had." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Because of what you did, because you caught Victoria and got that money back, Emma has a chance." After she left, I sat alone in the study for a long time, thinking about justice and revenge, about the difference between the two. I had wanted Victoria to pay for what she had done to my father, to me, to our family. But in the end, the real victory wasn't her downfall. It was Emma and all the other children who might live because stolen money had been returned to where it belonged. That night, I called my father's old friend, Robert Manning, the one who had inherited the vintage car collection. "Marcus." Robert's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. "How are you holding up, son?" "I'm doing well. Better than I expected, actually." "Robert, I wanted to ask you about something. The cars Dad left you, would you consider selling one of them back to me?" "Of course." "Which one?" "The 1967 Mustang convertible. The blue one." There was a pause. "You know why that one's special, don't you?" "It was the car he drove when he was courting my mother." "That's right. He always said he'd give it to you someday, when you found the right person to take for a drive in it." I smiled, thinking about Sarah Martinez and her kind eyes, her dedication to saving children's lives. I think I might have found her. 6 months later, Sarah and I took that Mustang on our first official date, driving up the coast with the top down and the radio playing songs from my parents' era. She told me about her research, about the children she was fighting to save, about her dreams of a world where no child would die from cancer. And I told her about my father, about the lessons I had learned about forgiveness and second chances, about the difference between winning and being right. "So, what happens now?" she asked as we watched the sunset over the ocean. "Now we move forward," I said. "We build something better than what came before." Victoria's betrayal had cost our family dearly, but it had also revealed truths that might have remained hidden forever. In trying to destroy my father's legacy, she had ultimately ensured its preservation. The company was stronger, the charity foundation was funding groundbreaking research, and I had learned that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from revenge, but from the opportunity to turn something broken into something beautiful. My father's final gift wasn't the $36 million or control of the company. It was the knowledge that he had ultimately chosen to trust me over the woman who had nearly destroyed everything we both cared about. That trust, even coming so late, was worth more than all the money in his estate. As Sarah and I drove home that evening, I realized that the story Victoria thought she was writing, the story of the clever stepmother who outwitted the bitter son, had become something entirely different. It had become the story of a father's redemption, a son's vindication, and most importantly, the story of how love and truth eventually triumph over greed and deception. The best revenge, I had discovered, isn't making your enemies pay for what they've done. It's living so well, so fully, so true to your values, that their betrayal becomes irrelevant to your happiness. And as we pulled into the driveway of the house where I had grown up, where my father had lived and died, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. Victoria was in prison, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was Emma and children like her, getting treatment they needed. What mattered was Sarah beside me, sharing my vision of a better future. What mattered was the company my father had built, now growing stronger under principled leadership. Victoria had thought she was writing my ending when she convinced my father to cut me out of his will. Instead, she had written her own and given me the chance to write a new beginning for everyone she had tried to destroy. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living well enough that your enemies become footnotes in your success story. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to save lives while you're at it.